I'm not worried about it.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to Rap Live here at the Central Library, where we're in conversation with Holly Williams. We're here in this wonderful, I'm calling it Nottingham Cathedral of Books, for a very special evening. So my name's Becky Cullen, I'm your host today. I'd like to start by giving you all the very warmest of welcomes and a warm welcome as well to people who are joining us online. So this very evening, is brought to you by NTU Arts, offering a dynamic programme of events, activities and experiences across music, visual arts, performance arts and literature for students, staff and the public. You're at one now. The RAP programme, Writing, Reading and Pleasure, has a host of events for students across the university, regardless of their academic specialism, and it's dedicated to developing students' creativity and confidence through reading and creative writing as part of their experience of Nottingham as both a place to study and as a UNESCO City of Literature. Tonight's programme includes some in-depth conversation, some searching questions and exclusive previews. Ooh, thank you. There's a special treat for you too. Nope, not the pancakes. I hope you had some of those last week. It's a special performance by the wonderful Georgina Wilding, who reads to us from her debut poetry collection, Hagstone. Ooh, thank you, very good. Like a beautiful box of chocolates, this evening is a box of delights. There'll also be a break and we should be finishing about 8:30. So let's get started. If you're with us online, please feel free to post your comments and questions for Holly and our beautiful magician's assistant, Alex Jovic-Sass, who's at the rear there doing all the technical stuff. Rapturous applause. We'll collect those and hand them over to us for the Q&A at the end of the event. Okay, we're all right so far? You know where you are and what you're doing, why you're here. Do you know why you're here, Laura? Yeah, good, great, okay, that's good. As long as Laura's okay. All right, this term's rap featured writer is Holly Williams. Holly Williams is an author, journalist and critic. Her wonderful debut novel, What Time Is Love, was published by Orion in 2022 and has sold in a further 12 countries around the world. Her second novel, The Start of Something, is published in April this year. Very exciting. Holly worked on staff at The Independent and The Independent on Sunday before going freelance. She's written for some seriously serious newspapers, including the New York Times, The Guardian, the FT, Vogue, The New Statesman, The Sunday Times, Tatler, The Evening Standard, BBC Culture, Elle, Stylist, Vice, The Stage, Elephant, Cosmopolitan and The Telegraph. Reviewing theatre and books with Observer, The TLS, Time Out and The Mail. So it's quite a lot of newspapers. So many words, so little time. Yeah, so many words. Holly also mentors scriptwriters and has delivered workshops for prestigious organisations such as the Faber Academy and the Writers' Workshop. She's also specialised as an arts broadcaster on TV and radio, but it's a real pleasure to have her here. And it's a real pleasure to have her with us this evening. So please, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Holly Williams. Holly, hello.
Hello, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. So the first question I've got written down is, who are you?
I mean, you've just answered that very, very well.
Well, yes, I have. It's a very strange question to be asking. Now, I was going to ask a little bit about What Time Is Love, and one of the main characters about What Time Is Love as a way into this question, because I know that the character Violet in the novel has got a personal connection with your own history. So I just wondered if you wanted to explain some of that to us.
Yeah, sure. Well, for anyone who hasn't read the book, it sort of imagines what happens if two characters meet in three different time periods. So Albert and Violet kind of have three shots at meeting. In the first part they meet in 1947, and then in the second part 67, and the third part 87. But each time they're 20 years old, so it's kind of three looks at their relationship in different eras and how those changes kind of affect them and their love. Yeah, and as you say, Violet definitely had some sort of family inspiration. She's from a small town in South Wales. I grew up in Mid Wales. She is not me, but I did draw a little bit on some things from my family history. So my grandmother was a working class woman living in Liverpool, and she went to London during the Second World War to sort of, work there, and that kind of inspired the character of Violet's job in the first part, where she works in the post office like my grandmother did, and then goes to London, meets lots of different people, has a kind of quite mind-expanding experience, I guess. And yeah, also one of the inspirations for the book was sort of thinking about how gender norms, gender expectations, limitations on women would have affected romantic relationships as well as women in their own selfhood, and sort of a bit of a thought experiment of, God, it must be really weird falling in love with men in a time when you weren't sort of treated as equals. And one of the things that sparked that thought was hearing a story about my grandmother wanting to go back to work in the post office after her kids were at school, and my grandfather, who was a very nice, thoughtful, kind, intelligent man, but being really like, no, don't go back to work. That looks bad on me. I provide, you stay at home. And she was like, nope, I want to go and do stuff. She's a very chatty and very willful woman, so obviously she got her own way.
That's grandmother's for you.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it was just kind of imagining, like, what would it do to how I felt about a person I loved if they were like, no job for you? So yeah, that was one of the inspirations. And then just quickly, otherwise we'll be here all night on one question. But also in the second part, which is in the 60s, Violet and Albert meet at university, and in that part she's the first person in her family to go to uni because of government grants, which was actually what happened with my parents. That's how they met. And my dad, you know, the kind of class and wealth gap's not as extreme as it is with my characters, but my grandmother on my dad's side had been to university, whereas my mum was very much the first person in her family to have that like higher education experience. And so you had a kind of like, because in each part I was like, what's going to be the thing that brings these two really different people together? And so in the 60s that felt like a natural way of doing it, and
it's
I
really
interviewed my own parents for it,
did
so
you?
it's quite fun.
It's really interesting the way that there's 3 different years in the book, and you're making connections with the stories in your own family and drawing on that. Is that part of your decision to use those 3 years? Which is another way of saying, why, Colin? Why did you choose 1947, 1967 and 1987? Of all the years you could have chosen, why those?
I mean, partly I think I'm just a bit of a neat freak, and that was very satisfying. I was like, oh, it's 3 parts, and they're 20 years apart, and they're always 20, great. But yeah, it did take me it was a bit of a head scratcher to think what's the movement or the thing or the the unlikely encounter in the 3rd part. Basically, so I had the idea of the war being a catalyst, because I think that was a time when people met people from really radically different backgrounds. So that kind of felt like an obvious one. And then the 60s, again, I had that idea from talking to my own parents. But also all 3 of them were like, I wanted it to be moments of kind of optimism and change when it was like quite exciting. So in 47 it's immediately post-war, and we actually sort of meet them, and there's like kind of excitement about the welfare state, like a society will be different, things are looking up. And in the 60s, you have a kind of counterculture revolution. And then in the 80s, what I alighted on was this sort of, that they meet at an acid house rave. So there's a kind of another moment where young people are coming together from all over the country, and there's some real excitement and kind of energy there, and maybe life is going to be different. And I think that, and not to give too much of a spoiler, but that section ends with the 97 election as another moment of like, oh my gosh, maybe things are changing, maybe things are different. And I think it's quite fun and also a bit like bittersweet to write about those historical moments, because of course, you know, we have lived through them all, you know, we've seen them, and we know that it isn't perfect, and the ideals of the hippies did not completely transform society entirely, or, you know, the welfare state is amazing, but, you know, in a bit of a shabby, underfunded state or whatever. So, we all feel very excited for 97, but we know the Iraq war is coming, etc. So I think it brings that kind of, my aim was that it was, you had all the excitement and rush of first love, but just as with a relationship, you sort of know that it's not all going to be plain sailing, and life is ups and downs, and optimism doesn't always play out that way.
That's a really comprehensive answer, thank you. And I really like what you said about them being moments where it's a cusp, isn't it? All these moments, 1947, 67 and 87 are cusps, and they're cusps for the characters as well. I was going to ask you about how the characters came to you. Like, is it a case? I write poetry, so I don't know. Is it a case that you wake up one morning and you think, right, I'm going to write a novel, and it's going to be about Albert and Violet in 3 different time periods? Job done.
If only.
So where did it come from, Holly?
Yeah, so as well as that thing about my grandmother, which sparked an idea, the other, I think the first place it started was a bit of idle daydreaming, where I just sort of thought, like, God, in a previous era, I would have stayed with my first boyfriend. I would have been probably married and had kids, and dear God, what on earth would life be like if I'd done that?
Dear God.
So, no shade on him, but it would have been a very different life. And so it struck me that it was, that was just a bit of idle daydreaming, but it did get me thinking, like, of all the people that you have, encounters with or that you fall in love with, how, like, would you even have met them if you'd been born in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s or the 50s or whatever? So it really was just a kind of thought experiment, and then I was like, oh, that feels to me something that maybe a lot of people might have daydreamed about, or at least might be interested in thinking about in their own lives, and so that felt like kind of a good hook. And then I just thought it would be really interesting to take two characters and just put them in those different situations and see how the world changes the chances of them falling in love, making it work.
So obviously you did a history degree. No. So did you do creative writing at school, or why become a novelist, Holly? What was your progression, I suppose?
I've always really loved reading. I think actually when I was a tiny child I was quite slow to learn, too busy looking at pictures, but then since I could probably read, I've always been a real bookworm, and also always really loved writing in that way that it just sort of feels easy, and as you can probably tell, the more natural way for me to express myself than anything else. And then I did write stories and things when I was a kid, and also when I was a student, and then it sort of got a bit overtaken by doing journalism, and that being like, thousands of words every week, if not every day, and there wasn't that much room. I also think that maybe when I was in my 20s I didn't really, there wasn't a burning, urgent story, or I didn't have a plot in my head that I was like, that's going to work. And there was a book before this that didn't see the light of day, and probably won't, where I think I figured out a lot of how to write. But I guess the short answer is I always really like reading and I always really like writing, so perhaps it wasn't totally surprising that I wanted to give it a go. And the nice thing was when I did sit down to try and write a novel, the first one probably wasn't terribly good, but it was really fun. I did genuinely feel like, oh, this is flowing out of me in a way that's incredibly sort of satisfying and enriching. Not always, not every day, obviously. Sometimes it's a nightmare, but...
So what do you think about that kind of idea of the struggling artist then? Because often novelists, or things that we hear about novelists, they're very tortured artists, aren't they? They kind of wander around, kind of sighing, scratching their heads, drinking too much coffee and whiskey, smoking constantly.
I think they're a bit of an endangered creature, those sorts, because I think they usually had a wife looking after the house, or an independent means or something. Whereas if you've just got to get on with it and you're squeezing it in any hour you can find, you don't have as much time for being tortured. I mean, my partner might disagree and say I spend a lot of time sighing and complaining. But, I don't know. If it's not rewarding, I think you're going to carry on really doing it. Of course, there are bits where you're wrestling with things and it's difficult, but I don't know. I find it very enjoyable.
Yeah, it's just really nice to hear it.
Yeah.
Hear someone talking about something that they really enjoy doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many other things you could be doing. I remember once interviewing the actress and the Chancellor, and I sort of said, have you seen this series or that series that she'd been in? And she was like, no, I don't watch many things. You don't have to. You could just be lying down. You could just have a bath. And I always think of that when you consider what you really want to do with your time. You could be having a bath. So it's got to be better than that.
Very good. She's very good in the hour. Have you seen her in the hour?
Yeah, she's great.
Marvellous, that's a little bit about you and these fantastic characters and what led you to write the novel. It would be great to hear an extract of the novel, if that's all right with you. What have you chosen to read for us?
I have chosen to read, where's it gone? I had to fold the page. It's actually a little wedding scene. In part one, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that they get it together and they get married, and it's a short little scene, so I'm going to read that, so as not to take too much of your time.
You go ahead, read the whole book if you like.
Yeah,
we can
So this is chapter 7 in part 1, July 1948. In this part, I gave the characters' names that could be abbreviated in different ways for each section to try and keep the sort of, from being too tangled. So there's Letty and Bertie in part 1, and Rose is Bertie's sister. Rose tucked the spray of orange blossom behind a strand of Letty's dark hair and stepped back. From below came the faint rumble of the car, waiting in the sweeping driveway of Farley Hall to take them to the church. "Look at you," Rose said with a sigh as her plump bottom lip wobbled. "Just the most beautiful." Letty bit her own lip and tried not to jump up and down. Her arms and legs felt full of a squiggling energy, a fizzy excitement that she didn't know what to do with. Today was her wedding day. Today, she became Bertie's. And today was the day that Bertie became hers too, that she would finally know all of him. Her stomach kept turning upside down at the thought. And then the thought that today was also the day that her parents and his, her world and his, would finally meet, which seemed to cause her stomach to drop to somewhere down around her knees. Attempting not to level that show, even to Rose, Letty set a smile on her face and smoothed her hands down her ivory gown. At least Rose was with her, had been every step of the way, helping choose a dress in a hushed, heart-stoppingly expensive shop in York, and helping her actually get into the thing that morning when her shoulders were shaking with nerves, and calling for endless cups of tea. Rose's round face was pink and damp as a peony in the rain, from alternately beaming and crying all day. "Well now, look at you," Letty laughed, noticing Rose's eyes were wet once more. "Honestly, Rose, I had no idea you were such a romantic." "Well, of course, what do you expect? I adore a wedding, and my best friend marrying my only sort of a brother, it's just..." But Rose couldn't quite keep her jovial tone afloat, as if her words were being choked with salt water. "It's just wonderful to see you both in love." Letty felt touched that Rose was so touched, and tried to ignore the undertow of sadness in her words. It had been obvious Rose loved having them both around Farley Hall, even if their wedding planning must have formed a constant, bruising reminder of her own unmarried state. And now to be left there, in Harold and Amelia's permafrost, while she and Bertie moved to London, losing both friend and brother at exactly the same moment. But there was no time to add all that to the stomach churning. It was her wedding day, and it was time to go. Rose handed Letty her posy and lifted the back of her dress as she walked down the stairs. And then there was her father, his own eyes springing damp as he watched her descend. Evan squeezed Letty's hand tightly all the way to the church as they sat in silence in the back of the grand black car, moving slow and smooth as oil. Letty knew his grip contained all the love he couldn't say out loud, but she worried too that it was Evan's way of trying to keep a grasp on an event that had been taken so wholly out of his hands. The decision to marry in the North had really been made so that their reception could be held at Farley Hall and paid for by the Brinkhursts. Letty had always imagined getting married in her little local chapel, but she knew this plan made more sense. Farley Hall had beautiful grounds, staff on hand, and a means to provide a spread, from stockpiling the estate's eggs, butter and cream, to throwing money in delicacies, drinks and a live band. Toby had been badgering the gardeners about which blooms he could use to decorate both house and church every time he came to visit. Taking advantage of all those resources did seem logical, a simple economic necessity, until they had to tell her parents. Evan and Harrod had gone very quiet, their eyes dropping to the well-scrubbed floor of their kitchen. Letty loathed herself as she stuttered on about Brinkhurst family tradition, as if she really believed that that should override the only tradition her mum and dad knew, that the bride's family gave her away and paid for the pleasure. It wasn't until Bertie stepped in, spinning elaborate, spurious stories of ancient aristocratic rituals, that she could see they grudgingly accepted it. So they were to be married in the Brinkhurst church in Knaresborough by the Brinkhurst doddering deferential vicar, the same man who had christened Bertie and Rose. Which might have been charming, Bertie joked privately after they visited him a month before the ceremony, if it weren't for the fact that he was so old his presence threatened to turn the day into a funeral and complete the trilogy. There was a hypocrisy nestled inside Bertie's willingness to be married by a man he didn't respect that Letty didn't find very appealing. And it was a quiet source of irritation too that she would have to say her vows in a building that, although just a provincial Anglican church, nothing especially elaborate, was so large and cold and set to be full of fancily dressed folk she'd never met and who Bertie barely cared about, compared to her own cosy chapel at home, the congregation she'd known intimately since birth, all tucked in at elbows and knees. Bertie was bemused by Letty's faith, and she could tell he liked to try to neatly box it down to simply a love of community and ritual and singing, things he could rationalise and anthropologise. What he didn't seem to understand was how talking to God made her feel, the sense of lightness inside her body, the way her edges blurred out, the merging of something vast and eternal and good. Talk of God embarrassed Bertie. Please, God, Letty whispered silently to herself, please let today go well. She didn't usually attempt to bargain with him, that wasn't how she conceived God, not really, but there seemed suddenly so much that could go wrong. It's time then, Letty, my love. Evan looked at her, his eyes serious and heavy. He put out his arm, and it felt so firm under Letty's thin grasp that suddenly it was like she was the one clinging on for dear life. The door to the church opened, and Evan's chest swelled out as he steered her down the aisle towards her new life, her new family. The organ surged, sounding too loud to Letty's ears as a divided thicket of faces turned towards them. Last to turn was Bertie. He wanted the moment to be somehow his own. Over all the months of wrangling with their families, of organising the church and the guest list and the reception, the wedding itself had come to feel more and more of a public show, put on for the sake of other people. But he didn't want it to just be that. He wanted their wedding to mean something, and his and Letty's private understanding of each other too. And there she was, advancing towards him slowly, slim and pale, as polished somehow as a statue, with her smooth dress and hair. And yet, when their eyes met, the same spirit sprang from them that he had first seen by the fire in the little pub in Brecon. A moment in time, a moment out of time, when their eyes could say, I love you, in a crowded room, and nobody heard but each other.
Thank you very much. But in that extract, the idea of class comes across very, very clearly. So we've got the Brinkhursts who live at Farley Hall.
Yes.
Up north.
Up north.
Yes.
But very grand.
Very grand. Very grand in the north. And then Violet's from a mining family.
Yeah.
But what made you choose those kind of, that kind of polarity, I suppose? Was there something about that you wanted to explore?
Yeah, I think for this book, very much the ideas for the characters came from thinking, like I had the structure a three different times, so that it came from thinking, well, what would be things that would provide conflict and contrast, and that would change across different time periods. And actually, I mean, maybe class is the one that changes the least, the way, you know, the gender role stuff changes enormously over three, but the class is always there. Yeah, so, you know, it just seemed like the more different you could make them while them still having that incredible attraction, the more sort of scope there would be to kind of look at complicated things that do affect us all, like class, opportunity and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all the references to D.H. Lawrence, who's a Nottingham writer we all know. And I wanted to ask you about that as well, because there's something about the way you mentioned Sons and Lovers and Women in Love and the Rainbow. Is there some what's your connection? What is your relationship with D.H. Lawrence?
Yeah, well, I remember reading D.H. Lawrence and being like, oh God, this is so intense about relationships, and like it's just like he digs it in, and it's quite nasty, and it's powerful. So reading, probably Sons and Lovers, and then I think I just read that for fun when I was like 18 or something, and then I think we studied. Women in Love is the one. Is that the one that there's the film of? Anyway, definitely studied one of them at uni, and and then read some more in my late 20s. So I just, to be honest, partly it was wanting to have 3 books so it could be the same author and a sort of trilogy thing, just a literal practical thing.
I'm glad it was convenient for you.
But and also like it had to be a writer that it felt plausible that they might be reading in each 3 parts. But also I guess he's somebody who did write about relationships and love in a very intense way, and also about class and women, masculinity, fairly unvarnished and like thorny on it all. So I felt like it was just somebody that felt plausible that they might have strong feelings on.
Yeah, well, that's really good, because I know that Lawrence was very interested in gender, but also sex and sexuality.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, Holly, because there is quite a lot of sex in the book, of different kinds.
Yeah.
How do you go about writing about sex?
Do you know, like quite a few people, mostly my parents' friends, have mentioned this, and in fact, I know I did also send a copy to a couple of my old teachers, sort of, you know, say thank you for being wonderful, inspiring people who made me love books. And one of them,
you're blushing as you put it in the envelope.
One of them said, well, no, honestly, it didn't really occur to me. Then one of them was like, you know, you're sort of good on the characters, and I was like, oh god, yeah, maybe that's a bit weird. It definitely didn't occur to me that there was that much, or that anyone would comment on it, because it's about a relationship, and I think most people in relationships have sex, but it's usually quite important as to whether you fall in love with someone, or how your relationship is going, or what keeps you together or drives you apart. So yeah, for me it just felt like a completely natural, obvious part of it. And I don't know if you noticed, but like it's a little bit more, the way it's written about is a little bit more polite in the first part, and a little bit more, you know, the tone sort of changes. And so, you know, I wanted to make the 60s one a little bit more like, what's the word for that? You know what I mean? Like 60s-ish in its vibe, and then the one in the 80s is a little bit more explicit.
It's very free love.
Exactly,
in the 60s.
It's a bit floaty or whatever. In the way it's written, like to try and have that changing period. So yeah, but I mean, if you think there's a lot of sex in it, wait till the next one, I'm afraid.
Oh really? Well, we'll find out about that one in the second half. Would you, obviously you've mentioned the role of women as well, and when we've been having discussions about it, we've all commented on the changing role of women through the book, and the way that, you know, in the first part there's this stultifying boredom as Violet's in this, surrounded by chintz and carpet. It's almost like the whole scene, all the soft furnishings are muffling her.
Yeah, pressing her by curtains.
Yeah, that's right. And then there's the expectations in the second part, and even in the third section in 1987, there's still a lot of content about, or a lot of discussion or exploration of gender roles. Do you think it's a feminist book? Did you set out to write something which was exploring feminist themes?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the lack of equality and how that impacts on how men and women live and love is like central. And what is feminism other than, you know, a drive towards equality? So yes, I guess the answer is yes. I didn't think of it as like, I am going to write a feminist tract, but yeah, it was always really important that was going to be a part of it. And I mean, it's just insane how much things changed in 50 years, and it's also insane how far things have to go in some ways. So like, yeah, it's just a very rich topic, I guess.
What I love about the novel is the way that lots of characters are looking in mirrors, or they're framed, or they're looking at pictures. And I really got that sense reading it, that you were framing this century for us.
Oh, that's such a nice comment. Thank you.
All right, you can put that on the
back.
Yeah, great. So I think what we're going to do is have a break now.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for Holly Williams. So yeah, we're going to have a 10-minute comfort break. Please recharge.
Hello and welcome back to Back Live at the New Central Library with me, Becky Cullen, and the fantastic writer Holly Williams. We've just had a short break and now we're ready to go again for the second part of this evening. And we've got a treat in store for you, the fantastic poet Georgina Wilding. I wanted to ask Georgina to take part in the evening to share some of her poetry because she writes, amongst many other things, fantastic poems about girlhood and womanhood, and it seemed quite right to hear her voice alongside a discussion of Holly's work, which explores the changing roles women play throughout their lives. So Georgina is a Nottingham lass. It's great to have another Nottingham lass around. She's published books, that's very named, by the very hip, and not just me and Georgina, I'll start again. Georgina is published by the very hip and trendy Verve Press from Birmingham, and her poetry collection Hagstone is full of extraordinary poems, and Roger Robinson explains that Georgina Wilding continually makes the quiet insight of the ordinary into something extraordinary in Hagstone. Perhaps it's the way her conceptual leaps work like magic, in that they are strange, entrancing and effective. She is a writer who we should all keep a close eye on. So it's a tremendous pleasure to have her with us here today. Please welcome Georgina Wilding.
Well, that was really lovely. Ooh, this microphone works, doesn't it? Hi everyone, how are you all doing? Good, that was a treat, wasn't it? I had the absolute pleasure of reading Holly's book for the Knox TV Book Club and really felt myself cheering along and shouting along with the main character. And actually I've programmed a little set for you tonight from my collection, Hagstone, that I think speaks to some of the themes in Holly's work and also in all of our lives, love, relationships, and the trials and tribulations that they bring. So the first poem I'm going to read to you tonight is a poem called Understanding Boys. And I'm going to let you decide whether you think this is based in reality or not. You can tell me at the end. Understanding Boys. We find condoms on Dad's bedside and it's how we know he's a boy. Boys stroke girls' arms and ask them to kiss. Boys only sometimes show up when they say they will. Boys have jobs. Boys ask you to get in your pyjamas because jeans are too thick. Boys are kind when they feel bad. Boys are allowed to smash things in temper. Boys tell you they know how to brush your hair and don't get in trouble when it has to be cut out. Boys follow you to school and grab you in the alley. Boys are husbands. Boys beat you until you wept on the stairs like a dog. Boys recommend each other on LinkedIn. Boys spend money they owe your granddad. Boys think you can't trick them. Boys eat girls and deny it, drive cars with their kneecaps, turn the wheel with one hand. Boys get rabies if you make them have veg. Boys get memory loss if their phone brightness is up. Boys can't swim in salt water unless it's their own. Boys are nose blind. Boys' hair is made from office lint. Boys' brains are made from microwave meals. Boys lose 1 inch of height every time they say, I love you. Thank you. No fight on that one, no talking all around. So the next poem is actually a new poem that I'm so excited to share with you. I've screenshotted it on my phone for the challenge of reading in tiny small print. Why have I done that to myself? So about a year ago, on Valentine's Day, I broke up with my partner of 3 years. It was great. It was really, really fun way to spend the day. And at the time, I was absolutely heartbroken about it. But on reflection, it was the best decision because he was awful. Anyone else? Yeah. We've all been there before. Yeah, the nodding heads. All right. So this is my poem about that, but I hope that you all feel the rage and empowerment within it when you think of your scenarios. So this is finally beautiful. A man full of nothing moves his motorbike to the dining room. balances a tea light on each of its handles, and tries to fuck it. Right. He cooks spicy beef and green beans, plates them up in his best cold bowl. The sound of the engine like running water, he takes off his shirt and touches himself at the thought of what they look like on the beach. These things happened in his mind. He puts his whole life there and lays on his back, sees himself in the way the bike throws its whole heavy body round the flat track, top spot past the finish line, over and over and up. At the end of the season, he polishes the spokes with his own spit, counts up his points to the exact mass of his being. Back in the dining room, the bike leaks its foul smell and the wallpaper holds it like a child. He lays at the tyres measuring their tread and sniffing up that oil smell. Bitter, sniffing and sighing into the whole bikes up his nose, kickstart up the eyeball, exhaust in the mouth, and he smiles. Finally, beautiful. Thank you. Alright, so when I was young, I spent a lot of time on the local park. Anybody from Arnold? In this room? No? Yeah. Red Hill Rec? I mean, anything to you? Oh, the 58. Yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time on that park, and as many of us did, and we found ourselves in that space. Not only did we find ourselves, but we found out a lot about our alcohol tolerance and sexualities. So, this is recreation ground. Every Friday we drink vodka. In the wet grass, the boys would ask the girls to get off. We'd display our best MTV, tongues out, hand-in-hair kisses. When asked if we'd ever do more, the circle of girls pulled back in succession, rolled eyes, shook heads. Gemini quickly followed, tripping, brushing off the nights we would hide behind my bed, her on the floor, me on top, and rub together. We married men in the field, wore bottle cap rings to prove our dedication, and friends threw corner shop crisps for confetti. We busied ourselves by organising dandelions into neat rows. When the husbands built sheds, we made sure they were polished. We even had children, dipped their heads in adjacent puddles as christening, and taught them to count by picking chestnuts. What wives we were, never sneaking to the graveyard behind the birches, never stopping to taste the sweat on each other's skin, never on our knees, begging the moon. Thank you. I really enjoyed singing across that little LGBT lesbian love story within Holly's work. It felt like a real treat to find that, because it's not so often that happens, so yeah, it was a real pleasure. Alright, so the next poem I'm going to read to you is also based on that park. Have we all been there, right? We've all had a park where we've had a few vodkas that we shouldn't have at like 15, right? Yeah? Nottingham. Okay, great. Not just me, that's good. Don't about that. Good. Alright. And I think there's something really special about the relationships that we make with our friends in that space and how we make sense of the world based on what we know and hear about other people's lives and families and what it's like in their houses. So this is after it. Some of us cry about our mothers, then spritz another layer of Charlie Red. We spin into a paste on the roundabout, drip from the seats into stalactites, which the others snap off and eat like Skegness rock. Empty cans thrown overhead are rockets. We try to straddle, but miss. Instead, we straddle our lovers. In bushes, up banks, in cars, curled over the steering wheel or a bench or a bin, we hold ourselves up, spread our cheeks and let the boys in. Wet with the stickiness of the day and nothing else. The mud on the football field is littered with the last burning butts of 1,000,000 cigarettes. It's as if all the stars have fallen and we're standing on them in trainers. Each of us bear things. Me against the boy who promised me the condom in his sock, but later stretched it over his head, blew it up over his nostrils. Now, he's floated to the telephone lines, and there's a crowd balanced on each other's shoulders to pull him back down. Origami swans folded from Rizzler's walk the park. We have the boys pissed in a nearby ditch so they have a pond to swim in and admire the things we can bring to life. The night backs away from us, turns its face as the last cigarette burns out. We threaten, please don't go, I'll eat you whole, and scramble towards the black. The field blooms with crawling girls, knees caked in ash and mud. Others use hair grips to stab down the night in its tracks, pin it to the soil, spread it out like a tent floor. The crying stops, echoes bounce between the trees, and the night's coat slips to a single thread across the horizon. The hard slap of morning shuts our mouths. It's about chasing the night. Alright, so this is my last little poem for you all now. It's a strange one that I love very much. I was inspired to read by Holly's look into patriarchy and what it is to be told that you must find a man and a grade. All women should have one. So this is my final poem. I hope that you've enjoyed them all. If you have, please come speak to me afterwards. I would love to hear all about it. Please don't tell me they're awful. Or if you do, just say it very quietly and I'll have a laugh. Alright, this is cod. What a luxury it is to be boring, to sit on wooden show chairs as unenthused as the cod, slapped across the cheek with ice and dropped dead behind the supermarket glass. To see no need to smile or speak with music, just a sound like a boat engine driving out the mouth, perhaps some faint memory of the catch. Slumped and grey and flaking, no one asks where the iridescent scales are, the high shine. Instead, they hail that fish as the nation's favourite and serve it up spineless every Friday night. Thank you.
Everybody. Let's give a round of applause and thank you. So, please join me in welcoming back Holly Williams. Did you enjoy that?
That was incredible.
It just felt like
amazing.
a really well curated reading that
Beautiful.
linked so much with your book.
Yeah, and I feel like actually lots of links with the next book even more in kind of energy and themes and stuff. So that's a perfect little bit of jam in the sandwich.
Fantastic. So shall we go straight there then?
Yeah, let's go there.
So, tell us about the next book, Holly.
Yes, so you really are the first people I've talked to about this. So I apologise if I'm, not quite as smooth in discussing it. But yeah, it's called The Start of Something. It's out in April, 11th of April, available to pre-order now. And it's quite a different vibe in some ways, although some of the things we've been talking about are definitely go across the two. So it's 10 chapters, 10 characters, and each sort of chapter leads on to the other, and each chapter has a sexual encounter. So basically, first chapter we'll meet Manda, second chapter Manda and Sai, third chapter Sai and Jasmine, and it goes on like that till you get to the end. And it's not really a spoiler to say that the first and the last one sort of connect. And I actually did rip the structure off a playwright, but he's dead, so I don't think he'll mind. It's sort of pinched from Laurent by Arthur Schnitzler.
All writing is rewriting.
Yeah,
fine,
exactly.
fine.
Lots of people have ripped that play off, so it's all good.
Yes.
But no, I knew the structure of that, and I thought, well, that's really interesting. But in that original play, it's very much like a woman being like, oh no, I mustn't, and then a man being like, yes, why not? And I sort of thought, well, wouldn't it be more interesting if you set it now when we've got lots of different ideas about how love and relationships could be, and lots of different, genders and sexualities, relationship structures, power structures. So yeah,
That sounds really exciting. Does that mean that you're starting out with people who might be described as young at the beginning? What kind of?
Yes, it sort of does this. Oh no, that's not right. they sort of start in their 30s, and then we get down to some kind of teenagers, 18-year-olds, and then we get up to some people in their 50s. So it's a relatively small thing, but yeah, there's been a variance in age as
Fantastic.
well.
And are they in one location?
They are in Sheffield and Manchester, so it's sort of ping-pongs back across the Pennines.
Yeah, those centres of sexual activity.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
The two horniest towns in Britain.
Do you reckon?
No, I don't know why I said that.
Just say that on one of those signs if you come into Sheffield.
Yeah, welcome to Sheffield.
Welcome to our peaks and troughs. So, did you start off thinking, okay, there's some unfinished business in the first book, or is it a completely different set of inspirations?
Yeah, pretty different. I think it was. It was just again, it was that like the idea for the structure. It kind of started with that pinged into my head, and then I was like, oh, I think there were fun things you could do with that. Someone should do that. Oh, maybe that should be me. And it was mulling in my head for like quite a long time, like at least 3 or 4 years before I wrote it.
It's a really intriguing idea, actually.
Yeah, and plotting it out. We were talking in some of the workshops and stuff about structure and planning versus sort of doing things spontaneously when you write. And this one had to be pretty rigid, because obviously if you just had two people who've been happily married in a monogamous relationship for 50 years, there wasn't going to be it wouldn't be it wouldn't really work if obviously everyone was straight. So there was a degree of like thinking about different identities in terms of what would work structurally, but also a degree of thinking of what would be interesting, what would provide some conflict or some new stories or new perspectives and things like that. Really fun though.
It sounds great. What a great idea. And also what strikes me about this is that this novel, with its lovely gold lettering, embossed covering, definitely looks like a romance, doesn't it? It definitely looks like it's been marked. Here they are on their clock, not looking at each other. But the previews of the cover of the next book have some flesh on them. It looks
black
like
and white flesh. Very tasteful, please.
Very tasteful. Yes, sorry, I should have said that. Very tasteful flesh. It's been marketed in a very different way.
Yeah, I think I had a 2-book deal when this was sold, and so but my publishers didn't kind of really check what I was writing, so I just wrote exactly what I wanted, and I think I think they were maybe a little bit surprised by it, and relatively quickly I think just sort of thought, well, probably the best way of marketing this is to do it slightly differently. There was definitely a world where it came out very quickly after this, and it had a really similar sort of cover, with the idea being that you build, your sort of brand. But apparently, I guess I just haven't done that. But I think it makes sense to try and give a book the cover that reflects it, and I'm really sorry I don't have one to show you.
It's a
but
beautiful colour.
Yeah, it's quite different. It's quite bold and sort of bright colours. Chunky font.
Very chunky font. Very Sally Rooney.
Yeah. And then the photo is sort of deliberately. I mean, I think you can tell the people that are probably relatively young, but they've gone for something that's a bit ambiguous in terms of gender, which I was very pleased by, because it is sort of. That's one of the things in it that was different identities.
So how would you feel about sharing an extract from the book with us, Holly, if that's all right with
fine.
you?
Yeah,
we'd like to hear a sneak preview, wouldn't we? Victoria would anyway, so that's good enough.
Yeah, I'm really sorry I'm going to read it from my phone, because
that's
as I say,
that's what all the young people do.
That's fine. Have it yet, and I might jump around a little bit so it's not a very long extract. Yes, okay. So this is from quite near the end of the book, actually, one of the last chapters, and we're with a character called Rachel, who is married to a man, and they have a sort of open relationship, and she's gone to a festival with her lover and his friends, but her lover's not there because he got ill, so she's sort of at this festival alone, having a great time, and she's met a drag drag queen from Manchester who she has really hit it off with. And so we're just sort of going to dive into a bit of the festival fun. And although Rachel would be happy to stay sitting cross-legged on the dry ground opposite Elijah, that's the drag queen, Liz and Bella seem done with their own shouted heart-to-heart and are insisting that they should all actually watch the fucking music. And so, onto the main stage, floodlit trees waving and swaying behind it like a chorus, Rachel's thoughts swaying too in her head as she tries to concentrate on the highly respected artist in the distance. But the music is lumpen and leaden to her, an abrasive voice drawling and arrogant, feedback squalls and moody, echoey atmospherics that just... Is it me, or is this a bit shit, she says, turning suddenly to Elijah. It is, isn't it? Why are we watching this? Like, it's not the worst, maybe I'd listen to it in the car or whatever, but it's not fun, is it? It's a fucking fun vacuum, darling, you're very right, let's go. They tell Bella, who they can see is keen to leave too, but Liz doesn't want to, and Rachel wonders if she's imagining it, but it feels like Elijah is as keen as she is to leave without them, and they practically run off while Bella and Liz are still debating it. Her feet feel too large as they walk back up a dusty slope of seated people watching the main stage, and her eyes feel like they might be being held open for her, pinned back on her head somehow. So what I think is, we should find somewhere to dance, maybe? Rachel's voice sounds strangely grave. Oh yeah, obviously. Absolutely. Slightly ahead for time. Dancing, she almost shouts, yanking at his hand and beginning to step backwards away from him. Come on. And then Elijah gets a naughty look in his face, his smile lines deepening, and he says, right then, and grabs her whole body and slings it over his shoulder, so her head and hair go upside down, and she shrieks and kicks her legs, and his arms are tight around her as he's stomping over the grass in those boots, and the latex of his outfit creaks beneath her torso, and she doesn't know quite what to try to hold on to. Eventually, he puts her down, and Rachel feels herself flushed and giggling like a little kid, and they scamper on, Elijah leading the way back into the woods towards a thudding beat. And this is magical. As they wind through narrow paths, they encounter tiny lit-up dolls' houses perched in the trees. In one glade, a film of someone seemingly dancing underwater is projected on a sheet that flutters slightly. And the beat draws them on till there is a stage playing instantly joy-inducing music that Elijah has promised is Italo disco. A man with orange and black striped shaggy hair presides over the decks. They join the dance floor and Rachel strips off her sensible puffer jacket. Elijah, of course, is a sensational dancer, and ordinarily she feels self-conscious even being near such unabashedly fabulous moves. But because she is with Elijah, anointed by him as a dance partner, it seems to liberate something inside her. Rachel dances like she is meant to be there, like this is her natural home with its ceiling of stars and branches and its floor of mud and grass, and Elijah's arms around her, spinning her, dipping her. After a while she strips her t-shirt, and after another while more water is needed. Away from a small but committed crowd, she immediately has to put all her layers back on. It seems like a very long time since the fries, and her limbs feel hollow, her stomach jittery, but she knows she couldn't eat a thing. They finally find the water tap, surrounded by a small quagmire of mud. Looking up while Elijah gallantly fills their bottles, Rachel notices a Ferris wheel, shrieks streaking the night air as people descend and rise, descend and rise. Elijah, Ferris wheel! He turns and bursts into laughter, presumably at the intense, determined enthusiasm on her face. Yeah, go on then, let's get in the queue. But there isn't much of a queue, and they practically run straight into a cart. Nice outfit, mate, drawls the man who clamps them into the seat before sending them off with a rock. Rachel frowns, but Elijah merely blows him a kiss as the wheel lurches to let the next pair on. Do you get much shit from people when you're all, in drag? Rachel can feel Elijah's mostly bare leg, surprisingly warm next to hers, while the handlebar is cool in her tight grip. Oh, sure. Depends where you are, obviously. These days, the response is often pretty excitable for women, just straight blokes you have to watch out for. And, they really find the beard and makeup thing a challenge. Leg hair and a miniskirt. Gracious. All very unsettling. Rachel can tell he's putting it on a bit, the blasé insouciant something of a shield against a less pleasant truth. Well, that's what drag ought to be, though, isn't it? She says, subversive, not just looking like a glamorous woman. Tell that to Instagram. They lurch again, higher into the air. The lights on the wheel are those old-fashioned, pear-shaped fairground ones, reminding Rachel of her childhood. I've run away and joined the circus, she thinks briefly. They dazzle so they can barely see beyond their own little carriage, just some inky trees. There's a pause while the next passengers are tucked in below, and she thinks she feels Elijah also taking pause. It's about the first lull in conversation since they left the tent. There are also Well, occasionally there are the odd queens and gays who aren't so keen on my take on drag because of the beard. Kind of, yeah. And well, just in general, his musical tones are low, almost tentative, slightly difficult to hear over the terrible blasting Europop played in the wheel. Also for having that more gender fuck, mass drag look, and also for being bi. The wheel lurches once more, but this time it is different, and they are shunted into a continual motion, turning, rising, and suddenly they are out up over the forest and can see the whole festival site, lit up and sparkling, a dark and glittering toy town. And Rachel is not sure if it is a sudden movement or Elijah's news that has made her catch her breath. Why hadn't she even thought that might be an option? And she lets out a shout of pure joy at the movement, the motion, at being whisked up and around like this, so light and fast and terrifying. And then Rachel and Elijah look at each other, eyes wide, mouths widening, and they both simply scream, and they kick their feet, and they raise their hands, and scream, and scream, and scream.
I think D.H. Lawrence would love that Ferris wheel. It sounds amazing. What a great extract. Thank you very much. I was going to ask you, before we go to questions from the audience, a little bit about your advice. So, as a novelist, what advice would you give to people who are writing their own novels, Holly?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the advice is really obvious stuff that people have said lots of times before, but it is good advice.
Yeah, but you've done it.
Read lots, but don't get too intimidated by the fact that people are, getting on with it. And write lots and just keep trying to do it. I personally found getting to the end of a book really, really helpful in my own sense of like, I can do it, I can complete a project, and even like I said, that book hasn't emerged, but it was really important to do that. And I've just finished the first draft of the third novel, and again, that feeling of like, yes, you are right. So I think, what's the adage? Like, an imperfect first draft is much better than a perfect first chapter. And the urge to keep going back and rewriting and tinkering. Like, it's never going to be as good as you think it should be. Like, all of my writing is crushing disappointment, and reading it out loud just reminds you of how it's not what you hoped it was something. So I think that would be my main piece of advice.
And lots of people debate different things about routine. So, you have to do a certain number of hours a day, or always write at the same time every day, or, break it into chunks and eat dairy milk in between. All sorts of different options. What do you think?
Well, the last book I did bribe myself for every 10,000 words I was allowed a little treat, and that I really recommend.
Okay.
No, I think when I started, I did really try and get into a habit of writing every day before work, and I was lucky that journalism hours are not usually starting very early, and then I was working from home a lot, so it wasn't very far from my bed to the desk, and I could do an hour before anyone else would be looking at their emails or whatever. That I found it was really useful. Also, there's something about first thing in the morning, my brain is not quite switched on, that actually can be kind of helpful for you just sort of, like getting into that unfiltered state. Definitely, it's better before looking at emails. But I also think that stuff's only helpful if it's helpful. It shouldn't be a hard and fast rule. And there's been times when I've written things with somebody, on a random train, with people sat around me because I'm like, I just really need to get the next bit done. Or, there are going to be stretches in anyone's life where, work or family or health or whatever means that you can't have a strict routine. And it's, again, I think it's much better to be like, I've got 20 minutes, I could write one paragraph, or I've got a free day, I'll write, and then do nothing for the rest of the week, than to be like, well, I cannot be a writer until I have a perfect routine.
Yeah, or I'm not a writer because I haven't written anything for 3 days.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you do what you can, and I think not getting despondent or feeling like it's hopeless is
helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Holly. Do we have any questions from the floor?
Oh my God, sorry. feel like I'm haunting this library now.
Yeah, that's very gargantuan cough, thank you. We all know the insides of Holly's lungs. So, any questions at all from the audience? Yes, Amy Beer.
I found your book very kind of visual and filmic, and I was wondering if you think about, or whether writers think about the kind of life after the book and adaptation, and whether something will be presented in another medium.
Yeah, I definitely try not to think about it too much in terms of, in the way of not wanting to write to anybody else's expectations or what might happen. But yeah, it's obviously, it would be lovely if either of them had a further life. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that I know a friend who's like, maybe the TV rights are sold almost at the same time as it's being sold, because it's got such a sort of strong, sellable narrative. Yeah, like lots of people have said that they think What Time Is Love could work as they can see it on screen. It's been a really common comment, which I think hopefully is a good sign that people have a nice vivid imaging of it. But yeah, it hasn't happened yet, so I don't know. There were a couple of conversations. I think people really liked the idea of them when they were actually like, what would be the structure in an hour's TV? Then it's sort of slightly faltered. Or I spoke to a film person who was like, but why do they keep coming back? Like, what's the sci-fi twist? And I was like,
Why not?
Why not?
Yes,
it's made up.
Fantastic. For the next book, 10 chapters, 10 episodes.
Could be good, yeah.
Give it on the phone, Netflix. Yeah.
It wasn't written for that in mind.
Yeah. Good question. Thank you very much. Any more questions? Yes. Did you have a yes?
Yeah, I was just about illustration really. Like, I just feel like I'm going to try and do children's stories. So it's just basically where you go for, like, I suppose it's illustration, illustrators and things like that. Just your advice on that really. And also another question was like, do you get published or self-published?
Am I
Get something published or self-published?
Oh yeah.
So do writers find their own publisher? And then there's a question about where can people get advice about children's books and illustrator? Are you a writer or an illustrator?
I want to write,
Got you. Yeah.
Okay, I can answer that bit.
But
you go ahead.
I don't have much information about
I can tell you.
so.
I can tell you that. So actually, if you are writing children's books, publishers like you to send in the text without the illustration. So don't let that hold you back.
I think that was holding me back.
Yes, don't let that hold you back. Get the book out to the publisher. You may need an agent, and there's something called a writer's handbook that will have all the lists of all the agents in it. It's digitised as well, and they actually match you up with the right illustrator. So you don't need to worry about your own artistic skills or finding somebody who's got any artistic skills. Okay.
Thank you so much.
And the second question,
Very
over to
interesting.
you, Holly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid I'm not a brilliant person to answer this because I don't have any experience of self-publishing. We did talk about it a bit when I did a Faber Academy course, several years ago before this came out. Self-publishing looks like really, really, really hard work. I think you have to be very up for being not only a writer but also your own hype man and marketing person, publicity person, all of that sort of stuff. And most of us on my course, to be honest, looked at that and thought, oh God, no. But there was at least one person on my course who's self-published several books and had lots of success with that. And she was incredibly energetic and determined and was very brilliant. So it can definitely work. And also, I think it's more fluid than it used to be. People can sort of self-publish a few books and then they get picked up by this company called Bookouture, who are sort of halfway between. They don't do physical books, but they do support your ebooks and things like that. I think it's a very different way to approach it, but it works for a lot of people, and it definitely, I think maybe at one point there was a little stigma attached to it, and I just don't think there is anymore. So I have absolutely no idea how that works in relation to children's books. I would have thought harder if you don't have an illustrator,
Yes.
but and also just the costs of, like, you know, the children's book probably isn't going to be an ebook, so yeah.
You were saying, I think it holds true for all publishing actually, to find the right publisher and agent. Look in the back of the books
Yes.
that you enjoy reading.
Yeah, it's like a good starting place. They're usually their agents, so yeah. I mean, I assume that's the same with picture books.
It is, yeah. Very much so. Thank you very much,
Thanks
Holly.
so much.
Thank you very much, audience. So, I'm going to now draw the evening to a close, like this. I'd like to say some thank yous. So I'd like to say thank you very much to all the fantastic people at the Central Library who have been so incredibly helpful. This is the first time you're in the middle of a historic occasion, because this is the first time there's been a live streamed event at the Central Library and the first author talk. So we would be breaking records if that team were here. But anyway, we've got the evidence because we're on digital media. So thank you also to the RAP team and the NTU team who support us to deliver these events. Thank you very much to all the RAP writers and the ambassadors. I have put here very cheesily, I know what time love is when I hear from all of you about what you're doing. So it's really fantastic. Thanks to Magic Alex at the back. And most of all, thank you to our audience. And most of all, our featured writer, Holly Williams. Thank you, Holly.
They are, but it's not terribly dynamic pose.
You should do it again, but with the bottom Oh, marvellous.
Very good, thank you so much.
Nice microphone. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, that was great. Yeah, really excited to start talking about the new one as well.